Hi everybody, welcome to our lab on reading and writing a scientific paper. And as you might have already seen or predicted, this is a dry lab where we're not doing an actual experiment, but what we're doing is getting you ready for writing your full lab report, which will be on an upcoming lab on enzymes. So the first thing I want to say is that if you have not read the paper on piranhas, which is posted in the online classroom, you need to stop this video now, go back and read that paper. If you didn't really understand the paper, it's pretty short, go back and reread it because it's important that you have read that paper before you study and take notes on this lecture. Okay? All right, so if you have done that work, then let's proceed. Now, when we talk about the scientific writing and the scientific literature, and you'll be talking about literature when you write your paper, there are different places where you can get your information. The first place is what's known as a primary source or a primary research, sometimes called the primary literature. And the primary literature is a phrase that I like to use, is the place where researchers report their original results. This is really the best place to get the nuts and bolts of the information that you're seeking. So this is where the researchers in this example here is Zing and McKeefer and so on and so forth have reported work on a feathered dinosaur tail which they found trapped in amber. And other people will use this information like you might use it, but the primary literature is the best place. And this is where you look in the library and find journal articles that will contain this primary information. Secondary sources are things like a textbook. Right? This is a biology textbook which is related to the book that you're using in this course. You also have things like news magazines, science news, for example. And these are secondary sources where they will pull together multiple pieces of information and summarize it. Now, can you use these pieces of information to learn? Absolutely. Can you cite these types of information when you write a lab report? Absolutely. But what you need to do is to use a combination of these secondary sources and primary sources when you're writing your paper and when you're trying to learn more about a particular topic. All right, so in the scientific world, the way that publication works is that you, as the author, will do the research and write a report. You'll write a paper that you will then submit for publication. And other people who are working in the same field will be serving as reviewers in a process that we call the peer review process. So these are other scientists just like you, and they will read the paper. There should be another arrow going backwards here that shows the paper coming back to the author with comments and suggestions from the reviewers. Sometimes those are just suggestions for the paper itself. Sometimes they want more experiments. Sometimes they want more data before they think this is worthy of being published. Then you resubmit a second manuscript or a second draft, and then once the reviewers are happy with that, they then send it to the editor, who then does additional modifications in collaboration with you, the author. Then once that is published, it goes out to the field of researchers in your area. Anybody can read these things. and then you get feedback, okay? And what you want is to get positive feedback so that if you're a researcher, this will build your reputation and help you secure resources for conducting your research. Now, when you write your lab reports, you're not going to go through this elaborate of a process, but what you should do is take advantage of some of the resources that I've given you in the online classroom, where you can use the Center for Writing and Communication, and you can send drafts to them and have them review things and give you feedback. I highly recommend that you do that. Now, are there places where false data is presented? Absolutely. So there are fabricated stories, there's uncritical reports that are not reviewed by peers in your field, there's agenda-driven or opinion reports, and you have to be really careful about these things because this is the type of information that can lead you down the wrong path. So this is obviously a fabricated story where Hillary Clinton adopts an alien baby. All right, so that's likely not real. So you don't want to report from things like the National Enquirer or the Weekly World News when you're writing a scientific paper. All right. Now, when you read a paper, and that's what we're primarily talking about in this particular lesson. In the second lesson, we'll talk more about writing a paper. But one of the things that's really important in both aspects is that you have a really good title. So the title should be clear, precise, and tell you something about the paper to follow. And in many instances, a really good paper, or a really good title of this paper will kind of give away your story. And that's okay. All right. So if you kind of give away your story a little bit, that's not that bad. It's actually a good thing because what you want to do is capture the reviewer's attention, capture the reader's attention so that they'll actually go in and read your paper. All right. Now, here's another title. This is the paper that I asked you to read that I posted in the online classroom. So this title, Safety in Numbers, Shoaling Behavior of the Amazonian Red-Bellied Piranha. So that gives you some information about whether forming shoals or large groups in this fish actually provides for some safety, or at least a feeling of safety amongst the fish. So if you're interested in that, you will read on. All right, so when you are reading, and this is one way, and this is a really important way, frankly, as a science student, that you actually learn science concepts, reading the primary literature. Because in the primary literature is where you have lots of new vocabulary, many words that you may not have encountered before, and this is the type of thing where you have to really put in an effort, learn that vocabulary, incorporate that vocabulary into your own personal vocabulary so that you can actually use these words. All right, so when you look at this and you see matching keywords is what I'm asking you to do. These are some keywords that were in that paper. All right, so where, if you were to match these keywords to the definitions on the right, take a moment and see how that works. All right, so let's go through this. So the first word is shoal. The first time I read this in a paper, when I think of a shoal, I think something related to a reef. Well, in this case, the shoal is actually referring to a school of fish. All right, so that's a shoal, is a large group of fish. Conspecific, right? That is of the same species, so members of the same species. A cormorant, a bird that I'm very familiar with from some of the research I did as an undergraduate, is a bird that is a predator of fish. Right? This is a bird that actually is very much hated by catfish farmers in Arkansas because they can eat something like 2 times their body weight in young catfish every day. Operculum. Operculum is a gill cover or a gill plate. Singletons, all right, these are individual fish. And ANOVA stands for Analysis of Variance, and that's a statistical analysis comparing the results of several treatments. All right, so when you take statistics, which almost all of you will at some point, you will learn how to do an ANOVA analysis. And that's one of the types of statistics that is very, very useful for giving you confidence in your data if you see a difference, that difference is actually real. All right, so then once you start reading the paper, you get to the introduction. And the introduction serves several purposes. First, it provides some background. And what you should notice here is highlighted in these sections set off by the parentheses is where people are citing the literature that they have read. So they're giving a citation for the primary literature that they have used to inform themselves and inform their study to make sure that they're doing their research correctly. They also talk about the purpose of their study, all right? And they introduce any model organisms that they're using. So what's highlighted here in red, they're talking about the red-bellied piranha, and then they give the Latin name. If you ever talk about an organism, so for example, if you're talking about peas, you're talking about beets, you're talking about piranhas, always make sure you use the common name and the scientific name, genus and species. All right, then you introduce your hypothesis. And your hypothesis will again be within the context of what is already known from your reading of the literature. All right, so all these citations here help support the hypothesis which is presented. When you write your lab report, make sure you use your literature cited effectively. Don't just throw things in there and throw literature into your citation section without actually using it in the paper. If it's not used in the paper, it serves no purpose. All right, materials and methods. Now this is going to be very truncated for you because this is an online class and you're going to be using some data that we provide for you. But the point is you're going to be reading about the materials and methods in the lab manual. And when you write your lab report, you need to provide a materials and methods section. We'll talk about this more in the second section of this that I'm doing as a separate video. But what I want you to notice here is that this is written as a narrative. And I'm going to emphasize this again later. It's not simply a bulleted list of we used X, Y, and Z pieces of equipment and A, B, C reagents. It's written as a narrative, but it's very concise, almost to the point of being choppy. Right? But it is, again, narrative form. How did you do the experiment? How was your data analyzed? All written in a narrative form. How many replicates? You look at this, it tells you how many replicates were done and what statistics were used to analyze that data. All right. Results. Several things about the results. Number one, the results are written again in narrative form. So you have writing and you will have some figures. So the figures will be full-fledged figures with a graph and a caption. And in the narrative, you will be talking about your results and referring directly to your figures. So that's why the figure 1 here is highlighted. And then when you're talking about data that might be in figure 2, then you will reference figure 2. And what that does for you is that it directs the reader to go and look at the figure. All right? Make sure you do that effectively when you write your report. One thing that is emphasized here is no data interpretation. So this is not the place where you actually interpret the results and say why it happened or what do you think it means. In the results section, you're simply reporting those results. All right, in the discussion, this is where you will interpret. You'll tell what those results mean. You will discuss them in relation to what's already known in the literature, and you will again be citing papers that you've read in the literature. All right, so this is not a short, trivial part of your report. This is often the longest part of the report because you'll be referring back to your figures again, as we showed in the previous slide. You'll be tying your own interpretation of the results back within the context of the papers you've read to learn about this particular topic. Okay? All right, so again, what do we mean by interpreting the data? So here's an example. So if in the results section you describe data like this, from 0 to 20% ethanol, there's a 40% increase in beta-cyanin leakage. From 30 to 50% ethanol, beta-cyanin leakage increased by 87.5%. Above 50% ethanol, the data plateaus. Figure 1. Okay, so we're referring to figure 1. Excuse me. All right, data interpreted. Membranes were tolerant. Okay, that's an interpretation. To ethanol levels from 0 to 20%. At 30%, membrane components appear to have been compromised, causing beta-cyanin leakage to increase. Leakage from the beetroot cells peaked at 50% ethanol and above. So this is where you're talking about the reason why this may have happened and what these particular results may mean. All right, and literature cited. Again, this is a copy from that Piranha paper, but this is where you give credit to the people who did that research and reported that research in the literature. This is really important because you want to give credit to those people, and when you publish something, you want them to give you credit. Now, note that when you are using information from these papers that you are citing in your report, you're not quoting them. You don't use quotes when you're doing the scientific writing, but you read the papers, you extract information, you digest it, you write it in your own words, and then you give credit by citing that paper in your own paper. Okay? All right. So here's an example of how you might do that. This is one that I did not do this slide. I wish I could put an X right through this first one because it actually has a quote from a paper. So we don't put quotes in your papers. All right, let's look at this one on the bottom. Many people take antioxidant supplements to reduce the risk of cancer and increase longevity. However, in some organisms, antioxidant consumption has been shown to shorten expected lifespans. Selman et al. 2013. So this is all written in your own words as compared to quoting that paper. So I guess there is some usefulness in seeing that, but you don't want to do that. But put this in your own words and then cite the paper. And this is a proper citation technique at all when you have 3 or more authors, and then you list all of the authors in the literature cited section. And make sure that you follow the instructions on page 77 of your lab manual when you're doing this. All right, so here's a picture that you probably have never seen before. And what I want you to do is pause this video and write a short paragraph describing what you see in front of you. All right? So just take a few minutes and pause this and write that short paragraph. All right, so hopefully you've done that and you have looked at the picture and written a little paragraph. So you might write something like, the picture depicts a rocky beach with a clear blue sky and light waves washing up upon the beach and a palm tree growing from the rocks. Okay, that's trying to be a little poetic there. But here's my point. If you compare what I just said, how I would write my description here, is that exactly the same as what you wrote? I would venture to say no. And here's the point of this picture. Even though you are looking at the same data, just like in your lab experiment, when you are looking at the same data set, two people looking at the same data and asked to write about that data will write it in their own words, and it will be different every time. So, when you submit these lab reports, they will be submitted through through Blackboard, and they will be checked using SafeAssign. And what SafeAssign will do is it will check all of your papers against each other. It will check all of your papers against all papers that were ever submitted before in this course for this university, and it will check all of your papers against papers which are out there on the internet anywhere. So if you copy from someone within the university, outside of the university, it will get flagged. And I unfortunately have had people do this almost every semester, where they will copy from each other, or they'll copy from a student from the previous semester. Please do not do that. Use your own words. Look at the data, look at the picture, look at the palm tree, look at the rocks, look at the sea, and write your paper. These will be individual assignments. Okay? All right. So let's make sure that in this class that never happens. All right. So that is the end of this segment of the lab on writing scientific papers. So this was primarily on reading the literature. You will learn an awful lot about how to write scientifically by reading the literature. And in the next segment, we'll get more specific about things that you should do when you are writing. Until then, have a great day.